Now, comrades, it would have been tragic if we could just designate you to roles of leadership in the province and in regions without having read the constitution of uMkhonto weSizwe together. Can I confirm that all of us have got copies of the constitution? So we have to read this perspective together so that we all have a common understanding of just who we are as an organization and what do we seek to achieve and how do we get to where we want to be. So we're going to go very patiently in terms of educating ourselves and understanding just what we need to do. So you realize that the constitution, if there's a person who's looking for a constitution there, let's give a copy. There are copies for everyone, comrades, they will bring to you. So you realize that in the constitution of uMkhonto weSizwe, outside of the contextualization of the statement of President Jacob Zuma on the 16th of December 2023, the quotes that recurrently in the constitution of uMkhonto weSizwe is a quote by Amalka Cabral. What will explain the context of what it says. But Amalka Cabral says something very important just before we get to the constitution. He says, in the process of building a political party, we must always educate ourselves. He says, educate ourselves, educate other people. We must educate the population in general. We must fight the fear of ignorance. We must fight ignorance in all its manifestations. And then we must eliminate little by little the subjection to nature and natural forces which our economy has yet not mastered. So every time we gather as uMkhonto weSizwe, whatever gathering of uMkhonto weSizwe must be a political school of uMkhonto weSizwe. So you can't go to a meeting of uMkhonto weSizwe and then you come out of that meeting and still having the same knowledge levels as you did before you went there. So if you go to a meeting which is called in the name of uMkhonto weSizwe and your levels of understanding are the same as before you went to the meeting, you are in a wrong meeting. So that is how a revolution gets to be conducted. That a simple task of all of us as revolutionaries, as activists, as leaders, is to reproduce ourselves, is to ideologically and politically reproduce ourselves. So we must be able to persuade as many people as possible to see the things that we understand as a movement. Now, the constitution of uMkhonto weSizwe, as is written on the cover page, was adopted by the National High Command, which we are going to explain is the highest decision-making body in the organization uMkhonto weSizwe Party. It was adopted on the 26th of September 2024. That was after several deliberations. Actually, in the last meeting of the national officials, the president was giving us a very clear history of the constitutions of uMkhonto weSizwe, including the draft ones that were presented in 2024. And then he explained the uniqueness of this constitution. Of course, there might be templates that you would learn from in terms of how a constitution is written. But the constitution of uMkhonto weSizwe is a unique constitution. It's not similar to the ANC constitution. It's not similar to the EFF constitution. It's not similar to IFP constitution. It's not similar to any other constitution. It has got unique features because uMkhonto weSizwe is a unique liberation movement, an organization that is fighting for total freedom. So it was adopted on the 26th of September. I think all of us should note that we're doing this didactic and simplified presentation so that all of us are able to go and do the same thing when we go to the ground. Are we together, comrades? And The Constitution has got 12 sections. So the first section of the Constitution gives the name of the organization. The second section explains the colors, logos of the organization. The third section speaks to the aims and objectives of the organization. Section 4 speaks to the values and principles of the organization. Section 5A speaks to membership in general as to what constitutes the membership of uMkhonto weSizwe. Section 5B speaks to the duties and obligations of members. Section 6 speaks to rights of members. Section 7. Section 7 is the longest structure that speaks to organizational leadership and structures of uMkhonto weSizwe. Then Section 8 establishes the MK Women's League. Section 9, MK Youth League. Section 10, MK Students Movement. And then Section 11, Disciplinary Code. And then this last section speaks to constitutional amendment. That is what but before all those sections outlined, there is a preamble in the Constitution of uMkhonto weSizwe. The preamble speaks to the politics, the ideological character, nature, and form of our organization. What does the preamble do? What does the preamble of uMkhonto weSizwe do? It first locates politically as to where do we come from as a people. And how it answers that question, you'll get to realize it's very interesting. It asks a question of where as a people do we come from? Where are we now? Why are we where we are? And what do we do to save ourselves from the situation that we're in? And who are we as a movement? And now in responding to the question of where do we come from as a people, it's just the first sentence in the preamble of the Constitution that says that we, the indigenous people of the African continent and all people of African ancestry all over the world share the common scars of slavery, colonization, and colonialism which dispossessed us of our land, natural and economic resources, dignity, heritage, culture, languages, and identity. But since the beginning of slavery and colonialism, all people of African ancestry continue to be on the margins of mainstream economic and social participation and relevance. What that means in simple terms is that all people who look like me and you have since the beginning of slavery and colonialism been conquered by the world racist system that subjected us to slavery and colonialism, that first refused to acknowledge us as human beings. Do you know why most black people were not allowed to vote all over the world, even in the countries which they were majority? It's because those who were in charge of society did not recognize them as human beings. So the history that we come from is a history of oppression and colonialism, so that is discussed, and that reality since its beginning of slavery and colonialism has not yet disappeared. It has taken so many battles. There have been so many battles to fight against the fact that we are a defeated people, but we are a conquered people, but we have not yet won the war. Are we together, comrades? So you know, in a war you can have different battles, and war can wage for many years, can go on for centuries, can go for decades. But in the war for our own dignity as black people, as Africans in particular, we have not yet won the war. And we say all people of African ancestry all over the world. So wherever people who look like me and you are found, wherever they are found, they are treated as subhuman. They are suppliers of cheap and easily disposable labor everywhere in the world. This includes in the United States of America. You know, in the United States of America, you have got possibly 40 to 50 million people of African ancestry, black people. So if you were to go and take those black people out, all of them, and then gauge them in terms of levels of literacy, employment, imprisonment, all of those things, they're like an African country that is stuck within the belly of America. They live in more or less the same conditions as we do. They're the ones who are informal settlement dwellers there in America, majority of them. If you go to Brazil, which has got the second largest black population in the world, so Brazil has got the second largest black population of people of African ancestry in the world after Nigeria. The people who look like me and you are still under oppression. So we locate the struggles for our total emancipation from that angle. And then the emphasis is that in South Africa, the black majority and indigenous people were subjected to centuries of colonialism and apartheid, which was manifested through the combination of political, economic, social, spatial, cultural, and knowledge ideology and apartheid oppression. What that means is that, you know, apartheid existed in different forms, comrades. Apartheid and colonialism, where one, it was political exclusion, that black people were not allowed to vote and be voted for before 1994 in South Africa. Since the beginning of humanity, there was never a time for the governance. So since the beginning, let's maybe be recent in terms of historicization. Since the beginning of this union of South Africa, black people were not allowed to participate in elections to elect a national government until the year 1994. So we had political apartheid, which was clear that black people cannot be voting, they cannot be voted. But also you had systematic and systemic social apartheid, which was expressed through racism. So racism was institutionalized under colonialism and apartheid. In the workplaces, in everywhere, in all facets of society. White people were born and bred to accept that black people are inferior. And black people were, you know, like, so you can imagine white children, majority of who grew up in South Africa, the first time they come into contact with a black person is as a maid who sleeps in a back room at home, as a gardener, who cannot be respected. That is what, it's a helper of white people. That is the systemization of racism. And you would think that such a white person will grow to be an adult who will respect any black person anyway. So apartheid was political, was a social systemic racism as well in the whole of society, even in workplaces. Do you know, under apartheid, even for the same job, you cannot be paid the same salary as a white person. It was not allowed. The law was saying a white person must get a higher salary than a black person. But also apartheid was spatial as in space. That black people were staying in the congested townships and very distant, infertile hinterlands and rural areas. When white people chose the best of the lands of South Africa. So that is what we had to deal with. But also apartheid was in terms of knowledge. So those who Englishicize a lot, they say, you had something called epistemic apartheid and colonialism, where the knowledge systems as a whole denigrated and did not add any value to black people's knowledge systems and understandings. But apartheid was cultural as well, that the cultural practices and norms of black people under apartheid and colonialism, we still are living, by the way, I'm talking about all of these things, which we still have as part of where we are now. Culturally, all of us were meant to aspire for whiteness. So speaking better English, you are seen as much more cleverer. Black people even were under pressure to want to physically look like white people, because that is the pressure that the lighter the skin was sometimes confused with being more beautiful. That is basically what apartheid got to instill in our system, that we got to despise our own skin color and culture and nature as a people. Then there, of course, were so many battles of resistance against colonialism. Back-to-back battles against colonialism in the wars of resistance that happened where the Xhosa, the Zulu were defeated. The only battle, by the way, which was won by the black people was the Battle of Isandlwana, led by Inkosi Cetshwayo. And the reason why that battle was won is because the Zulu army that time far outnumbered the colonial British army and fought as a unit. But almost all other battles, even when they got to reinforce in what was called the Battle of Ulundi, the British prevailed. Even Bambata, with the Bambata rebellion, they suppressed him and killed him and went to parade his head on the streets that we have killed your king, Bambata. But all other battles, majority of the battles that we fought in the resistance of colonialism, we were defeated because the British colonial settlers and Afrikaners had superior superpower in terms of guns and bombs. So since our defeat, we have not yet won back the battle, because that defeat is what took away our land, took away our dignity, our identity, our beingness in terms of where we come from. We locate this issue from that battle. And part of the battles to resist colonialism and apartheid was an attempt now by traditional leaders, by religious leaders, by the black intellectuals to try to unify all forms of black resistance against colonialism through the formation of the South African Natives National Congress, which later on became the ANC. But there's something which this constitution in the preamble emphasizes, that the reason why we got to be defeated, all of us, as black people and Africans in particular, who, when the colonial invaders came, we were more than 95%, 96% of the population, but we were defeated. Why? Because we fought in different isolated battles. There was never a time in the war of resistance where we fought collectively together against colonialism and colonial settlers. So there is never a time, General Daisy, where amaXhosa, amaZulu, and fought side by side in a unified form against colonial settlers. That is why when the Union of South Africa, like the British took over our land, they took over everything. Alongside the Afrikaners, they did then the 4 republics, Transvaal, Cape, Natal, Orange River Colony. When they formed the Union of South Africa in 1910, after they had fought amongst themselves in what was called the Anglo-Boer War, where a lot of black people died, by the way, in the so-called Anglo-Boer War. A lot of black people were donated to fight on either side. Once they united to form the Union of South Africa, it was only after then where traditional leaders, religious leaders, and the intellectuals, the black intellectuals, said that we perhaps need to form a unified political resistance to colonialism and the white-only government and state. That is why the South African Natives National Congress, the ANC, was founded on the 8th of January 1912. You can understand that 1910 is when the Union of South Africa is launched, and then they tried to organize conference. They couldn't get a proper date in the whole of 1911. And then they say that when January starts in 1912, whichever first weekend, we're gathering. We've been talking about these things for a very long time. And then they gathered and they formed that organization with an understanding that it must be an organization that represents the interest of all black people. So, you know, if we check the constitution of the South African Natives National Congress, 1912, Commander Luther, it had a National Executive Committee, but above a National Executive Committee, it had a Council of Elders, which were Amakosi and senior religious leaders. You'll see the similarity with the Council of Religious and Traditional Leaders in the constitution of uMkhonto, weSizwe, the party. We'll talk about that. So the preamble basically locates where we come from and emphasizes the simple fact that despite the so many battles that were fought, we are still living under neo-colonialism. That we could have gained, we fought for political power, we gained political power. Even that political power that we got is not complete. How do you know that political power is not complete? Is that some decisions that you take have to be approved elsewhere. So President Zuma will tell you, I don't know what's happening now. So even the political power which was gained after years and years of struggle against apartheid was not total political freedom. So President Zuma will tell you that there are so many decisions which he would have taken and he took, and then he was told that you can't take such a decision. But also even the manner in which the politics of South Africa is designed is that even if 100% of the elected political leadership were to take a decision, the laws of South Africa still permit that some 11 men and gentlemen who stay here in Braamfontein can change the decisions of the political leadership. The Constitutional Court can overturn a majority decision of the political leadership. So there is no total political freedom in South Africa. There is no economic freedom in South Africa. There is no economic emancipation in South Africa. And to see that is very simple. Land ownership, the control and ownership of the mineral resources, the control of the economy. There is not a single black person who owns a chain store in South Africa. There's not a single black person who has got a mega financial institution. If we get involved in the economy, it's very small stores which are not sustainable. We are spectators in our own, and 90% of the income that we earn out of our hard labor goes back to white people because we buy from their stores everything. We are not in control of the economy. So we don't have total political freedom. We don't have total economic freedom. We don't have economic freedom at all. We don't have social freedom because the racism persists. We don't have cultural emancipation because the cultural domination of the white minority is still a reality. We don't have control over the knowledge systems. We don't have control over the knowledge systems because we're still taught whiteness in our schools and universities of technology. That is where we are. And uMkhonto weSizwe then says, our aim is to fight now for total political, economic, social, cultural, knowledge, emancipation, and freedom. That is total freedom.